Thanks for waiting. Thanks for waiting. I'm so glad to be here. You know the great Dr. Barry? She was my mentor. I had come out of industry, right? I was writing news releases like you guys are learning. And Dr. Barrett was my mentor. And she's much smarter than I am about political communication. So I just think she should be up here and I should be up here. But I was thinking about this a little bit as we began to talk. Professor Chris, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad. You're so smart and good at what you do.
Thank you.
You know? Jeez. You know, it's funny. I had, like last semester, Boston University has a Washington, D.C. program. So students who are predisposed to love political communication go down to Washington, D.C. and study. They asked me to come down and do a series of seminars down there. So I went down 3 times and I talked about Trumpian public relations. But before I got to that, I got to thinking about this and I thought, you know, what is this? What is Trumpian public relations? And I began asking people and researching people, trying to understand our president's public relations processes, effects, influences, processes, influence, effects. What's he doing? But more important, what's he doing to your life and my life? How does what he does influence us, change us, make our days better or worse? That's something at least that I got thinking about. So I asked an expert in the field, somebody who's quoted all the time in the local papers, and I said, I have to talk about Donald Trump's public relations, I have to talk about Donald Trump's communication management. What should I say? You know what he told me? Tell him you have no damn idea what's going on. You don't know what's going on. So as we begin to think about this field, I guess what I'd share with you guys tonight is it's an interesting thing as an academic because in some ways you're supposed to know the answers. Like Professor Chris knows how to write a news release, starting with an inverted pyramid. You know what I mean? It's objective information you should know, right? When I do public relations, I understand the basics. I know what a public is, I know what stakeholders are, I know the basics. And so what we do is we pass on information about what we have learned. But sometimes, and this is the case tonight, the very best we can do is to, and pardon the cliche, get others thinking about a topic. And usually we're getting people to think about a topic for which we don't have a clear, distinct understanding. Does that make sense to you? So that's what I was thinking we could do over the next 35 minutes or so. We can talk after that. But think about this idea of what is this? What can we decipher from this? What information can we take from this thing we call Trumpian public relations and fighting fake news? What can we take from that? Go a little bit further with. And then possibly learn something from. Does that make sense to you guys, okay? So the goal here isn't to give you answers, but it's to base our discussion in the research literature, in popular understanding, and try to make it relevant to our lives, and that's the best I can do. So I wanted to show you this first slide I have here. I don't know how do I get this off?
Just click OK.
Yeah, but it's not in the,
You have your mouse?
let's see.
Oh, it's not on the laptop.
One second, where's that?
There we go.
Is it gone?
Yep.
I feel very, very important all of a sudden. Let's go with that.
Maybe you can go, you see where Donald Trump is, where it says fake news?
The
Yeah.
bottom left.
The little, yeah,
Underneath.
below, right there.
Yeah.
Click that.
That's it. See you guys later. We're all done. That's the presentation. I mean, anybody in here a martial artist, a karate person, box? You are. What style do you study?
All of them.
A lot of styles. But you know, one of the basic things we always learn is just how to throw a basic block, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about our presentation tonight, and I want to use the analogy of a block, to throw a block, to block something. Because you know, when the punch is coming at you, you can block it. And the interesting thing that happens in this process is that in the process of blocking a punch, we stop the dialogue. So if I say Donald Trump, and you don't like Donald Trump, and you block it, that's it. Or if I say Hillary Clinton, you don't like her, you block it, that's it. There's no more discussion. In other words, what happens to us cognitively is we form an opinion of that person, and then from that opinion, relatively quickly, we determine whether we're going to like or dislike what's said based on whether it's popular or unpopular about the person. So what I'm hoping to do tonight is to move beyond the block. What can we move beyond the block? What happens beyond that? If we just stop it and say, I hate Donald, I like Donald, I hate Hillary, I like Hillary, we're not getting to anything. So I thought, why don't we try this? Why don't we try to like move beyond the punch, move beyond this punch here, and see if we can move over there to some analysis. So we're not blocking it and saying, this is my opinion, we're just moving a little bit further. So that's kind of what I hope we could do tonight, is not stop our discussion here, I like, I dislike Donald Trump, but move beyond the block and say, what can we learn from his communication management style, good or bad? Fair enough? Is that fair? We'll do that? Perception. Perception. Does anyone here have an opinion on Donald Trump? Okay. Has anyone met Donald Trump? Seen Donald Trump? Heard Donald Trump in person? So it's all based on your perception of Donald Trump that's been mediated or shared with you. Now that perception may be 100% accurate. I don't know. Now I can cheat a little bit. Does anybody remember a senator named Senator Kennedy here? Senator Kennedy was arguably the most prominent member of the Senate. If I were to say, how many people have an opinion on Kennedy, you may raise your hand. And then I'd return to Dr. Barrett and I'd say, wait a minute, she really knows him personally. And so that all of a sudden it's a different kind of perception. It's a much more mature perception. Does that make sense to you? But our perception of Donald Trump and his communication style is just that. It's a perception. It's been built. Maybe it's 100% accurate. I don't know. But you and I know we've never seen him. We've never heard him. We've never been behind a closed door. We really don't know what he's like, but we know what the image of Donald Trump has emerged into. Fair enough? And maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not. But I've never been behind a closed door with him. I don't know this. I've never seen him with his hair uncombed. Fair enough? So as we think about that, what are these perceptions? What are these perceptions? I don't think it's that much of a leap to say our perceptions are in fact our realities. Our perceptions are our realities. So as we move a little bit further, that's actually where I'm going. This notion of a reality check. What's going on? Are my perceptions accurate? I challenge you to ask yourself that question. Are my perceptions accurate? And if you don't want to do Donald Trump, do Hillary Clinton. Are your perceptions accurate? What are they based on? What are the sources from whom I'm getting these perceptions? Make sense to you? No, I'm not talking about moral relativism here. I'm not saying everything is blank and you don't have a right to. Of course you have a right to a decision and a political opinion. And it may be absolutely right. But it is based on this perception, which in turn becomes our reality. So some people sometimes have asked, what's the definition of public relations? And really what we're doing is managing perception. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? We're managing perception. And that may or may not be accurate. Anybody experience prejudice? Prejudice is based on perception. It may or may not be accurate. Make sense to you? So that's the thing that I wanted to open up with. Just to have a little reality, a little think about that and say, what is my perception? And by extension, what is my reality? And I want to stress for the fourth time, you may be exactly right. So it's not a criticism of your reality. It's a comment on how that reality was formed. So when we talk about Donald Trump and fake news, that's really one of the things that we're getting to, is this notion of the perception of this person, which becomes our reality. Who formed it? How was it formed? Fair enough? Is that fair? Is that nice and nonpartisan? We can go a little bit further. And we can go into this thing is, what we find is that we attend to media presentations which reinforce our pre-held beliefs. So that's kind of, I think that's kind of factually accurate. I have a schizophrenic existence. It's schizophrenic. Because I'll watch MSNBC with Rachel Maddow, and then I'll watch Sean Hannity on Fox, and I'll feel like I've been hit with two punches, and I have no idea what's going on, because they're very different views of reality. Does that make sense to you? Now, I can tell you that my liberal friends certainly favor Rachel Maddow, and my conservative friends certainly favor Sean Hannity. But in this Trump mix of getting fake news, that's what we're doing. So I challenge you, whether it makes you feel comfortable or not, to at least think about, am I attending to news presentations as most do? which is to reinforce my pre-held beliefs, or am I attending to educate myself, to get a full picture? Does that make sense to you? One more time. Your pre-held beliefs may be very, very favorable. I'm going to share one political opinion I have. I'm against the death penalty, right? And many people are for it, and there's a good reason for it, good arguments for it, but I'm against the death penalty. It's very hard for me to tune into someone to say, here's why the death penalty is a good idea. I'm much more comfortable reading blogs or websites or whatever the case may be that say, no, reinforce my opinion. So that's really what we run into to some degree, is this idea, this willingness to reinforce our own opinions. Does that make sense to you? Maybe justifiably. I'm right about the death penalty. But does that make sense to you? But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to go to places to reinforce that. And maybe, I might be wrong about the death penalty actually, but we'll see where that goes. So if we take it a step further, we get this thing, this notion of this fake news, fake news. Fake news. It's come into the vernacular relatively recently. Has anybody heard the term fake news in the last week? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A majority of people have heard the term fake. So there's something going on, right? There's something that we're calling fake news. So it was a kind of interesting experience the other night. I was looking at the literature on fake news, and there's a limited amount of literature, at least in terms of the concept of how it's defined currently, right? So fake news. And it seemed, and I'm not sure about this, but it seemed to some extent, if you agreed, it wasn't fake news, and if you disagreed, it was fake news. Then there seems to be this kind of continuum. I'm not sure about this, but there seems to be a continuum, and it goes like this. On the one hand is something that is blatantly false, arguably just dead wrong, intentionally put in the media. Move a step the other direction. There's a mistake that a reporter made, an oversight with no ill intention. Move the other way. There's something that's actually critical and objectively true. Makes move the other way. There's someone who decides, in my role as a journalist, I'm going to turn into an editorialist rather than a journalist and share what I think. So there seems to be height. This is a fascinating lecture. Come on in. This is like the best. Does that make sense to you? So this notion of fake news, when we talk about Donald Trump, what I hear people say oftentimes is, I don't like what he said. He says, I don't like this. Therefore, it's fake. Is it fake? I don't know. Maybe it's fake. Maybe it's not. He'll say, in large part, there's a liberal media, mainstream media, who don't like me, who put out fake news. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's built on the assumption that you can't be liberal and still be a journalist. I don't know if that's true. But there's something going on with this notion of fake news that's nebulous. Do you know what I mean? Without shape, without form. There's something going on with this process of fake news that we're not sure about. And it really seems to come down, I'm not sure about this, but if you like what's said, then it's not fake news. If you don't like it, then it is fake news. What kind of analysis is that? You all know when you're studying journalism, they do the basic inverted pyramid with the goal of having you be an objective participant. Yes? The basic pyramid, the inverted pyramid, who, what, when, where, why in the first graph, quotation, and then you move down the pyramid. And what we find, in fact, is that that's one tool that we use to get to objectivity. So fake news. Who's concerned about fake news? Just concerned. It raises a concern. You know, a concern. Okay, I'm concerned about it too. I'll show you what I'm thinking about. First is what Trump said. President Trump said, look, the media is fake. It should be the media are fake, right? We know that. That's right. The media is fake. The media is really, the word I think, one of the greatest of all terms I've come up with is fake. Now, be careful. Because if you like Donald Trump, you might believe it. If you don't like Donald Trump, you might not believe it. Make sense to you? So be a little careful there. Here's what I'm getting at. As we begin to think about this notion, is this news, is fake news something that means to counteract inaccurate stories? Or is fake news the means to counter accurate stories? So if the truth is there, I can say it's fake. If the truth isn't there, I can say it's not. It's fake. I can say it either way. Does that make sense to you? So there's our challenge. That's what we run into. So again, I'm sorry, guys, I'm not giving you the answer. I'm trying to figure this out myself. Does that make sense to you? Dr. Barrett will tell you, we've been around long enough that we can say with some certainty sometimes, I don't know. I don't know. But that's something that goes on. But we can go a little bit deeper than that, actually. Be careful. Be careful. We want to be careful. What do we want to be careful of? Any idea? Sir? It's okay if you don't know.
Believing everything that you see.
Believing everything you see.
That you read.
Sorry?
That you read.
That you read. What do we want to be careful of?
Sure you don't believe something that's not true.
Not believing something that's not true. Anything else you want to be careful of? Sir? My martial arts friend? Actually, you look like you could beat me up pretty easy. I'm 50 years old, I got a belly. But when I was your age, man, I was slick. I beat you up when I was like, how old are you, 20?
18.
Okay, when I was 18, I'd kick your ass. But right now, I can't do it. Okay, so that's why I'm keeping the distance right here, the muscly guy between the two of us. As you think about it, makes sense to you?
Yeah.
What do you got to be careful of?
I mean, a lot of things nowadays.
I think so. I'm thinking of something even broader, though. What I'm getting at here, we got to be careful about democracy when we're talking about fake news. That's what the challenge is. Make sense to you? So when we say Donald Trump has fake news, that can be an opinion, it can be accurate or inaccurate. One more time. It can be accurate in your mind or inaccurate in your mind, depending on what you think of Donald Trump. But that's not really where I'm going. Where I'm going with this is that our democracy, a healthy democracy, the premise on which I'm building this next part of our discussion, is dependent on a healthy media. How many branches of government? Anybody give me the 3 branches? What are they?
Legislative, judicial, and executive.
Legislative, and the 4th branch of government is, the 4th estate is the media, the press, traditional journalists. So that's really where we're going. So we are dependent to a large degree for a healthy democracy on the role of the reporter. So that's why I think when you're studying journalism, it's so essential to what we're doing. You're essential to democracy. We had a great colleague, Nick Mills, used to call me in, and he'd say, I'm bringing in a PR guy, he's a spin doctor. And I would say, I am, we do that sometimes. I'm not always proud of it. But Nick, you have a responsibility as a journalist to inform the masses. And when you're not being straightforward with us, you have an opinion, you have an opportunity to say, I'm not being straightforward, this is an opinion. So there's the challenge, right? So there is something to be said, I think there's something to be said for a healthy democracy. So media plus democracy equals the cautious, the imperative, and that which is necessary in the United States. I have a privilege of teaching 25 graduate students last semester, 19 of whom were from China. Their notion of democracy is very different from our notion. Fair enough? Fair enough? And so this shtick about the media are dependent on the democracy is dependent on a healthy media is something that I think we at least want to tune into. Here's some of his trumps. Here's some of his tweets. You can just look at those. Is this mine? So where are we? What do I want you to think about next? Well, if you would, please think about a football field. A football field. 100 yards with grass, thousands of blades of grass. And let's say for a minute that football field represents the history of human communication. Do you guys have to do a communication history course? Do you have to do that course?
They have that in Introduction to Mass Media in the undergraduate.
They do?
And
Do
they
they go?
have it in Communication Ethics and Society in the graduate. So it's embedded in
It's
one of
embedded.
the introductory courses. But we don't have a separate course on the history of mass media.
Do they go as far back as our friend, the brilliant scholar Mel DeFleur used to talk about the cavemen?
Yeah.
Cavemen, I know it's a little bit gender specific, but cave
We
people are
use
just like
Mel DeFleur's text
Mel DeFleur's text.
in the graduate course, COM 701.
701.
We use Mel's text.
Well, that's what we found. Absolutely.
Right.
Mel was trained as a sociologist, he was an
Right.
anthropologist, he was a psychologist. He would say, look, communication isn't just what we do now. It goes back to your grandparents, to your great-grandparents. And I'll say great-great many, many times, and that's how far back it goes. We can't conceptualize this. Back to the football field. If you go to the middle of that football field and you pull out a blade of grass, and you take the top of that grass and just hold the very tippy top of that grass, that's the percentage of time during which we have communicated through social media. Now, I'm using the term social media. We could say alternative media, or new media, or digital media, or emerging media. There's distinctions among those, but for now, let's just say social media. Because again, what we're talking about tonight are big ideas to get us thinking. Anybody know what they had for dinner yesterday? How about 2 days ago? Okay, now multiply it thousands and thousands of times, and that's the history we're talking about. And all of a sudden we arrive at this football field, all this communication, and we're doing this thing. How many people have been on a mobile device today? More than once. More than twice. Every 14 seconds. Thank you for your honesty. So as we think about this, that's the environment into which we find ourselves. That's what's going on. And so Trump is using these technologies as you are. I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent research I did on Capitol Hill, but for now, can I just ask you to think about that? The first time in history we've done this. So this fake news is created and disseminated globally like that, literally like that, and that's what we're in tune with. Now let's take it a step further. If we're that in tune with it, what does that do to our democracy? Let's take it a step further. What does that say about the value or lack thereof of fake news? Whether it's true or not, it can go just like that. And when I do that, I mean that. That's about how quickly it can move. And we all, remember I said I'm going to ask us to think about our lives. We're part of that because we all have mobile devices. Well, most of us have mobile devices. Have mobile devices. Everybody here with a mobile device? It's integral to your world. Now let me tell you, just as an aside, I'm not doing that thing. You people are always on your mobile device, I'm not doing that. But the reality is that something drastically has changed. You remember Janice Barrett and Chris, I think, when we started teaching, no one had a mobile device.
Right. Didn't exist.
They didn't exist.
And students came to your office.
Yeah.
They didn't just email you.
No, they didn't. I'm just home doing email all day because they're emailing. We cut our office hours from 6 hours to 3 because nobody was coming.
Right.
Even to see me. Are you guys okay on this? Making sense? Is this making sense to you guys? Are you thinking a little bit about this? We're not giving you the answer because I'm not sure of the answer, and I'll tell you why in a little while. But we're about 40% through with our discussion, and I want to make sure that you guys are on track. You doing okay? Everybody all right? So let's return to this. When I came in here tonight, it was a quiet room. Something's happened in my life as a professor. I used to walk in, and there'd be a dialogue back and forth. Students would be talking among themselves. Check that out when you go to class next time. I looked tonight, and about 40% of you were on mobile devices. So something shifted. And that news, fake or real, can reach your mobile device like that. I'm not going to go too far, but give me 1 minute, 60 seconds. You got a watch on?
I don't.
Anybody who's got a watch?
Somebody has a mobile device with a second timer on it.
Give me 1 minute. No, you can tell me.
Oh, I can tell you, okay.
Okay?
1 minute?
Ready?
Yep.
Okay, so here's the deal. As we think about this, there is some literature to say that these changes that are occurring with social media are not massive. That's what happened with the printing press at the end of the 1400s. These are profound. What do they do to stress us out or not stress us out? How have they redefined time and space for us? If we think just a little bit further about that, are we addicted? Well, some would say that physiologically we are addicted because we know when we use these mobile devices, how am I doing?
Good.
Okay. When we use these mobile devices, there's a dopamine rush that feels good to us. If Skinner was right, B.F. Skinner, we're also psychologically addicted because we are intermittently reinforced. We're not just reinforced once, but intermittently we are. Sort of like fishing. If you're reinforced, you catch a fish every time. and you fish for half an hour. If you're not, I'm done.
You're done.
Okay, give me just a minute. I did my best. If you're not catching a fish, then you might fish all day. You're intermittently reinforced. So perhaps these mobile devices are predisposing us to use dopamine to enjoy the rush, even if we're not conscious of it. And perhaps I say perhaps because I'm not sure. If Skinner's right, we certainly know that we are reinforced intermittently. So the question is, what are they doing to us? And by extension, what are Donald Trump's tweets doing to us? What are they doing? I'm going to stop here. Give me 10 seconds. Tell me when to start.
Okay, go.
Here's the question. Who is controlling whom? Dramatic pause. Who is controlling whom? Something to think about.
Okay.
So we can go further then. And think about this football field. So I began studying this massive change that is coming. This massive change. But it's not really massive. Again, I thought it was really a profound change. So I began to look at a recent, Seidel, he writes the PR books all the time.
Yeah.
He had this to say about Donald Trump's public relations, right? I don't think he's particularly partisan. Maybe I'm reading it. I think he's pretty, am I reading it? He's pretty middle of the road.
Yeah.
He's not an editorial guy. But he said he said, and by the way, if you're a Trump supporter, there's good things coming up. So I'm trying to make it half and half. If you don't like Trump, you still got to pay attention. If you do like Trump, you still got to pay attention. Just for this little while. Think about this. No understanding or respect for public relations. Public relations at its core, we've been saying this for years, is about building relationships, not tearing them down. Something to think about. Point number 2. Public relations instincts are all wrong. We should be instinctual to finding solutions. What the data are very clear about with the two-way model is that when we converse, we come to collective opinions, we're generally stronger than when we go to one way. Again, just getting you thinking. Number 3, no advice wanted. And this is actually really true, as I understand it. His PR people will say do this, he'll do this, and they're contrary to one another. Make sense? Second guessing, and there's this notion of shaming. So you call people by name, etc., etc., etc. Little Mario, etc. Does the emperor have clothes? Is it just a facade? Something to think about. So I promised you what we did tonight was not give answers, but offer this broader perspective on something to think about. So are you guys thinking? You're thinking about this, these kind of things. Let's go to the other side, okay? But before we do, I want to tell you about my friend Jim. Dr. Barrett is one of the most humanitarian, kindest people I've ever met. Just so you know. I don't know if she's an easy grader, I don't know anything about that stuff. I'm one of the wisest people I've met. But I met somebody else who's wise. See, here's the story. I don't have a car. I think you should support the cab industry. Because you know what? People who drive cabs work hard and need the money. I know Uber, I got it. I'm not like that remote. But I challenge you, get in a cab and see if that person doesn't really need the money and find out how long he or she has been working. Anyway, so I get this guy, he's 72, his name is Jim. He comes up and I would call in the morning for a cab and he would pick me up. And one day he said, Eddie, I can't do it. Uber's killing me. I'm going to start my own business. Would you call me when you want a ride, and I'll give you a ride, and I'm just going to start like a livery service. So I call him. Now, Jim has virtually no formal education. I think a 10th grade. But there's something about Jim that's fascinating to me, and it's this. Jim is one of the smartest people I know. Now, I'm not doing this thing. I'm educated, he's not, isn't it great he can keep up with me? I mean, I really believe this guy is brilliant. In a holistic sense. He's also a dyed-in-the-wool and a hardcore Democrat. But Jim's thought, to start at the bottom, is this. I shouldn't put this up because you'll read this, and the big drama is leading toward Jim. Jim said, Eddie, tell your friends, quote, damn it, he won. Hard to take. He didn't win the popular vote, but he won. Something about his messaging worked for some people. If you look at the approval ratings, it's about 38%. I've seen it as high as 42, but that was a Fox poll, so you have to take that in mind. That's millions of people. Next thing, Jim. That's Jim's thought on Trump. He voted for Bernie, by the way. He wrote in Bernie Sanders. By attacking the media, it's a fascinating strategy that you can solidify your base. Right? You can attack the media and solidify your base. He did articulate some flaws in the U.S. system. There's a question whether or not those were new flaws, but he articulated them and he talked about them. I think we can agree there's simple messages and simple language. And the general rule, as I understand it, is that if you're doing writing and your average sentence is about 15 words per sentence, that's effective writing. If 75% of your words are one-syllable words, that's effective as well. And you'll find that his simplicity works. So you can do what you want in that. This is an interesting thing. So what is this public relations? What is this thing that he's doing? Trump's approval ratings may be among the lowest for an incoming U.S. president's histories. His ratings, if one were to measure his brand, his awareness, his visibility, his reach, his impact, and his voice, in terms of the media and broader public hearing, is right off the charts. Something to think about. Just to think about. Just to contemplate. If you don't like him, my sense would be realize that there's maybe some validity to what he's saying, to what this says. If you don't like him, that will empower you. Let's continue on. I'm going to change the topic just a little bit, and I'm going to talk about something with which I'm very familiar, and that is the PR people who work for members of Congress. Here's the story. Stay with me. There's 3 points. Point number one. Virtually every member of Congress has a PR person, traditionally called the press secretary. Point number 2, when we talk about press secretaries, they're very confused because they're trying to understand social media. As a matter of fact, Capitol Hill has recently found a new position called digital manager, who's a relatively young person who handles social media because the press secretary can't do it all. And number 3, here's what happened. When I talked to them, I asked them this question. What's going on with social media on Capitol Hill? I mean, I tried to phrase it in such a way that it was non-judgmental and it was wide open. And the question was, talk to me a little bit about social media on Capitol Hill. And there's a fascinating pattern that developed from this. The second part of that pattern dealt with Trump and arguably with fake news as well. Here's the first thing they said. What do you think the first thing they said? When I ask a PR person what's going on with social media, they would say, anything? Give me something. Say whatever. What do you think?
They aren't sure.
Perfect. They're not sure. They don't know. It's confusion. But then there was a predictable pattern over about 24 interviews. This was the pattern. What do you think the next thing they spoke about was? With no prompting from me. Donald Trump's tweets. That was the next thing that was on their mind. Mm-hmm. And here there was utter confusion. And there was lots of discussion about fake news. Now, it seemed, this is anecdotal, it's qualitative. I don't have a margin of error to back up this claim. But the Democrats tended to say something about tweeting. The Republicans tended to say something about fake news. There was something going on, I'm not sure. But here's what they tended to agree on. They don't know what the heck to do with the tweets. Like, what are you supposed to do? You've heard this term messaging? We know this. When a crisis strikes, you have a single messenger who handles the communication management, yes? But again, and this was from Republicans and Democrats, let me just share an anecdote. You can never tell to whom you spoke. I've never done that because you protect their confidentiality, you promise them. But I can talk in a very general term and say this was a fairly conservative Republican from the South. And he said, I don't know, quote, I don't know what the hell's going on. You got me. I said, good heavens, what do you mean? He said, he tweets. They want to know, the constituents contact me, they want to know what's going on, what the member of Congress thinks. The member of Congress is in a committee meeting. Alerts start popping up on my mobile device. Next, his press secretary says something contrary. He contradicts that. My member of Congress is still in the meeting now, he's moved over to the House. He comes back, the constituents want to know what he thinks, but he can't quite say what he thinks because he's not sure, because one of the people in Trump's administration had just said something completely contrary. Do you see what we're getting at? And that's a little bit of the reasons why I think it's pretentious to say, I know the answer, I know the situation well, but how do you handle that? And that was I would say, when we do these interviews, Dr. Barrett knows this well, you look for themes that emerge. That was a really present theme. That was really right up front. The first thing was confusion, to your point. The second thing was Trump's tweets. They don't know what to do. Let's continue on. Fake news was a term many people used 18 months ago, but is now seen as one of the greatest threats to democracy, free debate in the Western world. As well as being a favorite term of Donald Trump, it was also named 2017's Word of the Year, raising tensions between nations and may lead to regulation of social media. And yet, here's the trick. Nobody can agree on what it is, how much of a problem it is, and what to do about it. Has anyone in here ever taken a basic research course? Basic research? When you know this so well, because when we did our doctorates, this came up. And Professor Chris knows it well too. The notion is when you're talking about something, you have to define what you're talking about. Guys, I can't find a definition of fake news. I mean, I can find lots of definitions, but I can't find continuity among and between those definitions. It does seem, though, if you like it, it's not fake, and if you don't like it, it is fake, because perhaps we're predisposed to go to what we like. Is that the best we got? Is that good for our democracy? So where we are, my friends, is we're in a new territory, new media, new messaging, new president. New media, new messaging, new president. So you twist my arm. How do you really feel? I'm concerned. Right, so this is like an opinion, right? This is an opinion. You don't have to agree with me. Because the democracy is dependent, as I understand it, as I was taught, on a healthy media. If we have this dichotomization and this predisposition to go to one side or the other, and therefore call ourselves educated, I'm not sure that's ultimately good for democracy. Now, in fairness, Dr. Barrett and I have been friends for a long time, and I'm hard-pressed to think of someone who knows both, she has her opinions, but who knows both sides of the argument better. Does that make sense to you? So maybe that's what we can ask of ourselves. Do you know both sides? As PR people, we know that's a good idea. Because if you know the contrary, we talk about the death penalty, I can argue in favor of the death penalty really, really well. Make sense to you? Something to think about. And I'll guarantee you that Trump's PR people could articulate the opposite position extremely well. We got you thinking a little bit? Thinking a little bit tonight? So finally, the final thought. Let me share with you 5 things that I wanted to make sure came across to you guys tonight. Fair enough? 5 major points. Point number 1. Are you willing to move beyond the block? You can have rich discussions about politics. You get a beer, you sit down with your friends or whatever, have a beer, and they have a rich discussion. That's not really what I'm doing. That's fun, right? I mean, it kind of makes you a better speaker, especially if you like me. You're like, I love that guy. That's not really what the goal is tonight. So thought number one, are you willing to at least recognize that most of us go to sources that reinforce our pre-held beliefs? Fair enough? Point number 2. Fake news. What is fake news? I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure it's not good for democracy. Point number 3. As we think about this and push it just a little bit further, and we think about our democracy, point number 3 is my premise that a healthy democracy is dependent on a healthy media. I think we have to demand a lot of the media, and we certainly have to recognize the distinction between opinion shows, i.e. Rachel Maddow and Sean Hannity, and that which is more traditionally news. And when we go to traditional news sources, we want to be careful that in fact we're getting news as objective as possible, whatever that is. It's hard to be careful, rather than editorializing. Point number 4. The press secretaries on Capitol Hill, who in fact shape messages that send out. Let me share with you. I bet you no one in here can name a press secretary. But I bet you everyone in here in the last 3 months has been influenced by something some press secretary said. If you've read anything about your member of Congress, his or her press secretaries are probably instrumental in that. So they're doing something. And the point, this still with point number 4, the question here is then, well, with the press secretaries, what are they concerned about? They're concerned about Donald Trump's tweeting, definitively. And number 5, I return right to what we talked to initially, and that's this. As academics, we're sometimes supposed to know the answer. I know the answer, and I do know a lot of answers. I mean, I studied really hard. I can tell you what a standard deviation is. I can almost do multivariate analysis. I can define the paradigms and I can do that stuff, right? And you guys probably can to some degree. But I'm still kind of caught here because I'm not sure what's going on. So to some degree, our discussion tonight, I hope, is helpful and real because I don't know what's going on. But something is. And I'm not sure it's good. Which leaves me with this final conclusion. So feel free right now to put your partisan hats back on. I love them, I don't like them. But at least for a minute, maybe we stepped away, thought a little bit, reflected a little bit on something that may be worthwhile for us. Not as fun, it's not as fun, but it's real. So that's what I got, thanks.